I am glad that you are here. Thank you for being here this week, and hope this service has been a blessing to you as we've gotten to sing some songs of praise together, hear from God's word, and welcome a brand new member into God's family of faith. It's always a good morning in worship when we're able to do that. And now we get to reflect on God's word a little bit more. And right now at Zion, we're in the middle of a series called Detour. And just in case you haven't been here, kind of the big idea behind this series is this. There are certain things in life that even when you plan for them, they don't always go exactly according to plan. In fact, you can be one of those people who likes to plan everything meticulously, and you will put a dot on every I and a cross on every T. But no matter how much and how hard you may plan, things don't always turn out the way that you think they should be. And when these things happen that you don't plan for, a lot of times those are the things that can kind of send your life on a detour, hence the title of this series. Because in this series, we're taking a look at some of the biggest detours that so many people face in life. And we're asking this really big question, which is, how in the world do we respond when stuff happens that is way beyond anything that we would or could ever plan for? And so today, as we continue our series, we're going to be tackling a tough topic. In fact, I'll tell you right up front, I wasn't exactly looking forward to preaching this sermon, because we're going to be tackling life's detour of depression. And part of the reason I think this is such an important detour to tackle is because if you are struggling with depression, or if you got a loved one who's struggling with depression, you know that this detour can run your life into a ditch if you are not careful. In fact, depression is one of those things that nobody ever plans for, but a ton of people experience. Last year in the United States, 21 million adults experienced one major depressive episode. And when I say one major depressive episode, I mean they had to go to the doctor, maybe get some medication, see a psychiatrist, maybe even receive some inpatient treatment. That's a little bit better than 8% of the U.S. population who are not only struggling with depression, they're struggling with major depression. 20% of brand new mothers struggle with postpartum depression, kind of that baby blues feeling. And half of that 20%, so 10% of new mothers, struggle with major postpartum depression, where again, they got to go to a doctor, maybe go to an inpatient treatment facility, receive some sort of medication to help them because they can't keep on keeping on. Last year in the United States, 86 million antidepressants were prescribed to people, because this is something that goes on all across the nation and affects so many people, both young and old. You know what the most depressed state in the United States is? West Virginia. Almost 30% of the people there are clinically diagnosed with depression. You know what the least depressed state in the United States is? Hawaii, that's right. I'll leave it up to you to figure out why that might be. But part of the reason I bring up all these statistics is because one of the great lies that people can often kind of feel and experience when they're struggling with depression is this lie: I'm the only one. I'm the only one who feels this way. I'm the only one who's going through this. And because I'm the only one, no one else is going through it too, and no one else can be around to help. But just statistically, that is not true. In fact, depression is not just a statistically recent phenomenon. Depression is nothing new. This is something that people have been going through for a very long time. This is something that people have been struggling with for literally millennia. And that takes me to what I want to walk through and work through with you today, because today I want to walk through and work with you a psalm from the Old Testament, from the book of Psalms, Psalm 88. PK read it a little bit earlier in the service. And part of the reason that I love the Old Testament book of Psalms is if you read through the Psalms, one of the things that you'll discover is that the Psalms cover like the whole range, the whole gamut of human emotions. There are Psalms of praise. There are Psalms of thanksgiving for when you're feeling great about life and the way that things are going. There are Psalms of confession for when you're feeling a little bit guilty and you need to get something off your chest before God. But there's also a category of Psalms known as Psalms of laments. And actually quite a few of the Psalms in the book of Psalms are Psalms of lament. Theologians will count about 43 different Psalms of lament, which are Psalms that flow from sorrowful spirits. Psalms that come from depressed souls. And so what I want to do is I want to walk through one of those Psalms with you, Psalm 88, and PK read half of the Psalm, the first 9 verses a little bit earlier in the service, but I want to read through all 18 verses with you right now. And as we read through these verses, here's what I want you to do. I want you to try to practice a little bit of empathy. Even if you're having a great day, even if you're not depressed, as you listen to the words of the man who wrote this psalm, just try to imagine how this guy must have been struggling. And even if you can, try to feel what this guy was feeling. And so this is Psalm 88. Lord, you are the God who saves me. And so the guy who writes the psalm begins with a little bit of theology, and he says, okay, God, I just want to say this right up front. I believe that you are the one who can and does save me, which is why day and night I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. God, I really need something from you, and here is why. I'm struggling. Verse 3, the psalmist says, I'm overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. Now, it's right here that we begin to get a little glimpse into just how depressed this guy really is. He says, I am so depressed and I am struggling so much that I feel like I'm right there on the precipice of death. I feel like I'm getting ready to pass away. In fact, here's how close to death I really am. Verse 4, I'm counted among those who go down to the pits. And the pit here would have been like a literal pit that you dig in the ground like a grave. And so the psalmist says, you know what? I'm so close to death that I'm pretty much as good as dead. The coroner is coming for me. The grave diggers want to bury me. I'm like one without strength. I'm set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave. And then the psalmist takes a little turn. And he begins to, in his speaking, turn on God. And he says to God, you don't remember the dead anymore. Those people are cut off, the psalmist says, from your care. And because I feel so close to death, I feel like you don't remember me anymore. I feel like I am cut off from your care, oh God. In fact, not only do I feel like you are distant from me, as the psalmist continues, he says, I kind of feel like you're coming against me. Verse 6, God, look at what you've done to me. You've put me in the lowest pits. Now, notice something here. In verse 4, the psalmist says, I feel like I've fallen into a pit. Then by verse 6, he says, I feel like God is shoving me into the lowest pits. And this is a picture of depression. Depression is one of those experiences that you have where you can fall, and you can fall far. But just when you feel like you can't fall any farther, you fall from the pits to the lowest pits. Because emotionally, sometimes depression can feel like it's a bottomless pit. The psalmist says, I'm in the darkest depths. Verse 7, your wrath lies heavily on me, and you have overwhelmed me with all your waves. And this is kind of another emotional depiction of what depression feels like. The psalmist says, here's what it feels like. It feels like you're standing in an ocean. It feels like I'm standing in an ocean. And there's this wave that hits me and knocks me down, so I get back up. And another wave comes and hits me and knocks me down, so I get back up. And the waves keep coming, bigger and stronger and faster, until I can't get up anymore, and I feel like I'm being overwhelmed, like I'm drowning in depression. And then after verse 7, there's this interesting word, and if you've read the book of Psalms, you may have noticed this word before, but maybe you don't know what it means. It's the word Selah. And this is actually an ancient Hebrew musical term, because that's what the Psalms are. They are ancient Hebrew songs, things that the Israelite people would sing. In fact, the book of Psalms is basically ancient Israel's songbook. And this little word Selah denotes the end of one stanza in a song and the beginning of the next stanza in a psalm. And the way that this would work is you would finish singing the first stanza of the psalm, and then the Israelite band would just keep on playing, but you wouldn't keep on singing. This would be a moment for everyone in the Israelite congregation to pause and reflect on what they just sung. And so the invitation of the Selah is this: just pause and reflect on what it feels like to be falling into a bottomless pit of despair. Just pause and reflect on what it feels like when God comes against you. Just pause and reflect on what it feels like to have waves crashing over you so that you feel like you're drowning in depression. Anybody want to think about that? It's kind of a depressing thing to think about. Don't you think? Here comes stanza 2 of the psalm, verse 8. The psalmist continues, God, you've taken me from my closest friends, and you've made them repulsive to me. In other words, the psalmist says, I used to have some friends who I could count on, who I could lean on, who were there for me, but now they're all gone, and I'm all alone. And not only that, my friends have become my enemies. They don't even like me anymore. And I'm confined, the psalmist continues, and I cannot escape. I kind of feel like the walls of my life are closing in around me. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up and praise you? And then we get that word again, Selah. And so everybody would stop singing, the Israelite band would keep playing, and everybody in the congregation would kind of reflect on what it feels like to be lonely and isolated, what it feels like to not only lose your friends, but have your friends turn against you. Reflect on what it feels like to have the walls of your life closing in around you. What a terrible thing to think about. Don't you think? Verse 11, the psalmist continues, is your love declared in the grave? Is your faithfulness declared in destruction? And just a little bit of technical work here for you. The Old Testament written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word for destruction here is the Hebrew word Abaddon. And what's kind of interesting about this word is that this word is actually used as a nickname for Satan himself in Revelation 9. And so the picture here is almost this. The psalmist is saying, God, not only do I feel like you have left me, I feel like Satan is hunting me. I feel like he's chasing me down to destroy me. Verse 12, are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me? Why do you hide your face from me? From my youth, I've suffered, and I've been close to death. Turns out that the guy who writes the psalm has been struggling with and suffering from depression for a very long time. Ever since he was a little kid, ever since his youth, he's always struggled with the blues. And God, I've borne your terrors, and I'm in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long, they surround me like a flood. We're back to the waves again, where he feels like he's drowning in depression, and they've completely engulfed me. I can't swim through them anymore. And now we're back to loneliness. The psalmist concludes like this. He says, you've taken from me my friend and my neighbor. I got nobody left. No friends. In fact, my only friend, the psalmist concludes, is darkness. Darkness, the psalmist says, is my closest friend. A little bit more technical work here for you. In Hebrew, the final word of this psalm is darkness. A more wooden way to translate this final line would be like this. My closest friend is darkness. And the picture is this. This guy is struggling so much that the only relief he ever gets from his depression is when he closes his eyes and darkness just comes over him. It's kind of like he wants to go to sleep and never wake up. Because that's how depressed he is. Amen. You see, that's the end of the psalm. The last word of this psalm is darkness. Anybody regretting the choice to come to church this morning? You know, theologians actually call this psalm the saddest psalm in the Bible. I agree. Doesn't get much sadder than this. And yet, even in the midst of all the sadness, I do think there are some things that we can learn about depression and for depression if you're struggling with depression. Or if you love someone and they're going through a dark time, I think there are some things that maybe you can take from this psalm for them too. And so in the balance of time that we have remaining in this message, I just want to give you two little takeaways that I think we can take away from this psalm that can help us when we're struggling. The first thing that can help us when we're struggling that this psalm gives us is this psalm just gives us a very honest voice in the middle of depression. This psalm gives us a very honest voice in the middle of depression. I mean, think about all the pictures of sadness that we get in this psalm. The psalmist says, here's what depression feels like. It feels like you're falling into a bottomless pit. Here's what depression feels like. It feels like waves are sweeping over you. It feels like you're drowning. Here's what depression feels like. It feels like God has abandoned you and Satan is coming after you. Here's what depression feels like. It feels like all your friends have left you and the walls of your life are closing in around you. Here's what depression feels like. It feels like the only relief from it is for darkness to cover you. Doesn't get much more raw and real than that. But here's the reason I think the rawness and the realness of this psalm is so incredibly important. One of the great temptations when somebody is struggling with depression is this. It's to hold it all inside. It's to say nothing to nobody. And yet one of the things this psalm gives us is just an honest voice. And just psychologically and clinically, this is critically important. Because here's what you need to know about your emotions. One of the best things that you can do to exchange your emotions, to take one emotion and exchange it for another better emotion, one of the best things you can do to exchange your emotions is very simply to express your emotions. To give an honest voice to how you're feeling. A little over a decade ago, researchers from the University of California conducted kind of a fascinating study. They took 88 people with arachnophobia. They didn't like spiders. And they got a big old glass aquarium, and they put inside of it a big old tarantula. That sounds kind of fun. And they grabbed all 88 folks, and they said, here's what we want you to do, okay? The spider's on that end of the room. I just want you to walk toward the spider until you can't get any closer to the spider. When your arachnophobia overtakes you, then just stop. And so all 88 people did this, one by one by one by one. And then, after they all tried to get as close as they could to the spider before they kind of freaked out and flipped out, the researchers gathered all of these people together, and they divided these folks into 4 different groups to interview them. And the first group that they interviewed, they sat them down and they said, hey, just tell us emotionally about your experience with the tarantula, with the spider. What were you feeling? Were you upset? Were you scared? Were you overwhelmed? Did you want to cry? Did you want to yell? Like emotionally, what was going on inside of you? And so they kind of shared a little bit about their hearts and about their emotions and about what they were feeling. Then they took a second group out of this 88 and they interviewed them too, but they interviewed them a little bit differently. They said to the second group, guys, we'd like to know about your experience with the spider, but here's what we need. We only need facts and no feelings. Don't tell us anything about how you were feeling. Just give us the brute facts of what happened. How close did you get to the spider? How many feet away were you? What kind of aquarium was the spider in? What color was the spider? How big was the spider? Just give us facts and no feelings. Third group, they gathered these folks together and they said, guys, I know this was kind of a traumatizing experience for you, so let's just talk about something else, okay? We can talk about anything else you want to. I don't care, the weather outside, talk about how your kids are doing. talk about your spouse, talk about whatever you want to, and just spend a few minutes talking about random stuff so that you can get your mind off that big, scary, hairy spider. And then the fourth group of people they interviewed, they didn't really interview at all. They simply said, why don't you take just 15, 20 minutes, sit here, and just think about your experience. Just kind of mull it over in your head. Now, after a week, they brought all 88 people back. And they invited these people to try again, to see if they could get any closer to the spider. And here's what the researchers discovered. By far, the group of people who were able to get a lot closer to the spider was the first group of people. In fact, some of them were able to get so close that they were able to like walk up to the tarantula and actually touch it. I don't have a lot of arachnophobia. I don't know if I could do that. But after just 1 week, they were. And here's what the researchers discovered. Because these people were able to express their emotions, they were able to exchange their emotions. They were able to exchange their fear for bravery. If you have an emotion of sorrow, one of the best things that you can do to exchange that emotion is to express that emotion. A little bit of Shakespeare here for you this morning. Okay, this is from Macbeth. Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the o'er-fraught heart and bids it break. If you never speak it out, it's just going to eat away at you. It's just going to break your heart. In fact, can I just get real practical here with you for just a second? If you're struggling, or if you know somebody who's struggling, let me give you a couple of resources, a couple of avenues to express what you're going through. First is a Christian counseling group just a little south of here in Georgetown, the Timothy Center. If you want to talk to a licensed psychologist or a licensed counselor, there's the number on the screen. Or maybe you're thinking, I'm not quite ready for like counseling. Maybe you just want to talk to a pastor. Great, there's the church office number on the screen. Take a picture, write it down, whatever you want to do. But I'll put it to you like this. The guy who writes Psalm 88, because this psalm made it into Israel's songbook, this means that this guy spilled his guts before a whole nation of people. He was so honest about his sorrow that his sorrow got recorded for history and posterity in the book of Psalms. And so if this guy can express his sorrow to everybody, you can take your sorrow and express it at least to somebody. Because an honest voice really can be helpful in depression. That's the first thing I think the psalm gives us. Second thing the psalm gives us that can help us in the middle of depression is this. This psalm can give us a real hope. This psalm can give us a real hope. You know, a lot of these psalms of lament, they follow kind of a formula. The formula is this. They start sad, and they end glad. They start with sorrow, but they end with hope. Let me give you one example of this. Psalm 13, okay, the beginning of the psalm, verse 1. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? It starts sad. The psalmist feels separated from God. But then notice, just 6 verses later, because this is a short psalm, in verse 6, it ends glad. I'm going to sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. There's the formula. Here's the problem with Psalm 88. It doesn't follow the formula. It starts sad and it ends in despair. It starts with the psalmist crying out to God, and it ends with no answer from God. It's real, but it doesn't feel very hopeful. And so here's the question, where's the hope in that? I want to come back to that question, but first, can I tell you a little story? I've discovered in this world there are two different kinds of people. There are those who love their high school years. Anybody have a real good time in high school? Best 4 years of your life type of stuff, okay? And then there are other people who kind of have like the opposite experience, where they don't have very good memories of their high school years. My wife Melody, she had a great 4 years in high school. She loved her high school, made a lot of friends, made a lot of memories. In fact, every once in a while, she'll be scrolling through social media and she'll see a post from one of her old high school friends, and she'll say kind of wistfully, "Oh man, those years were such great years." And she'll look at the post, and then she'll look at me and she'll say, "Except for all the years that I've spent with you, honey." And I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, right. You know, in high school, what do? On Friday night, you go out, hang out with your friends, get home at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. Now, by the time we get to Friday night at our age, we're so exhausted, we're in bed by 8:30, okay? I'm not sure these are the best years of our lives. But here's the thing, I'm glad that she had such a great experience in high school. To be candid with you, my experience was the other experience. In fact, there was a moment in my teenage years where I was so sad and so depressed and so distressed and so overwhelmed. I was so Psalm 88 that my parents actually took me to go see somebody, a counselor. I can still remember there was this other time where I was just really struggling, and we took a little family vacation to the beach. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and we went to the Oregon coast where the water feels like it's 20 degrees, but you still get in. It's beautiful scenery, though. And we were visiting this little maritime museum that was close to the coast and had a little hiking trail out back. And so we went hiking as a family. At the end of the trail, there was this deck. And it just overlooked a little bit of scenery. And so I just kind of hoisted myself up on the railing of this deck. And because my mom is my mom, she had her camera. And she snapped this picture of me. That's a very sad and surly teenage Zach. You know, I didn't know she had taken that picture. Until years later, when she was looking through her photo album, and I was there, and we came across that picture, and I asked her about it. And she said to me, you know, whenever I look at that picture, I still get sad. Because whenever I look at that picture, you look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. Can I show you another picture? This one is not a picture, it's a painting. It's by a Spanish artist named El Greco, who painted this in the 16th century. It's housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. It's a picture of Jesus carrying his cross up to Calvary. I like this picture, but one of the things that's always kind of struck me about it is how serene and peaceful Jesus looks. I mean, look at him. He looks like he has everything under control. He looks like the cross is no problem at all. In fact, notice the cross doesn't even look heavy. It looks like he could just, pick it up, plop it in the ground, climb up on it, and take care of everything. Let me show you one more picture. This is another painting from a century earlier, from the 15th century. This is by a German artist named Hans Mulcher, and it's a picture of the same event, of Jesus carrying his cross on the road to Calvary. Now, I'll be honest, when I first saw this picture, I didn't like it. And here's why. I thought to myself, that doesn't even look like Jesus. That looks like a grouchy German dude painted by a grouchy German artist. But the more that I've reflected on this picture, the more I've come to appreciate it, because I think emotionally it's probably a little bit more accurate. Because here, Jesus doesn't have everything under control, or at least it doesn't seem like he does. And in this painting, the cross actually looks heavy. He's bending down under the weight of it. In this painting, you know what it looks like? It looks like Jesus has the weight of the world on his shoulders. You know, I have enough time and distance between me and my high school days to realize that as a teenage kid, I didn't really have the weight of the world on my shoulders. But I know someone who really did. Because on the cross, Jesus carried the weight of the world's sin on his shoulders. And on the cross, Jesus carried the weight of the sting of death on his shoulders. On the cross, Jesus carried the weight of the world's sorrow and sadness and despair and depression on his shoulders. I love the way the Old Testament prophet Isaiah talks about this. Isaiah 53 verse 4. He says, "Surely, I know this for sure. Jesus was carrying something. He has borne our griefs and he has carried our sorrows." Now here's what that prophecy means for you and for me. If you are bearing your own griefs, and if you are carrying your own sorrows, Jesus would like to carry those for you. In fact, Jesus would like to take those from you because they belong on the cross. And in exchange, Jesus wants to give you something else. He wants to give you hope. Now, this takes us back to Psalm 88 because the question of this psalm is, where's the hope, right? I mean, where do you find hope in a real psalm about real life like this? The hope is there. You just got to know how to look for it. So one of the things that a lot of psalms come with are these little things called superscriptions. They're tucked right before the first verse of the psalm. And the superscription kind of gives the reader of the psalm a little bit of background on the psalm, a little bit of history about the psalm. The best way to know how to describe the superscription is it's kind of like the ancient version of copyright information for psalms. It tells us, who wrote it, why they wrote it, what the tune is, who would sing it. And Psalm 88, you can look this up in your Bibles. It actually has one of the longest ancient superscriptions out of all the psalms in the book. In fact, just so you don't have to look it up for yourself, here it is. The superscription says it's a song, and it's a psalm of the sons of Korah. The sons of Korah were kind of like the band who sang and played this song. It's for the director of music. It would have been like directed for the ancient Israelite choir and for all the ancient Israelites to sing. And it's according to the tune of Mahaloth Le'anoth. Don't ask me to sing that for you because I don't know what the tune is, but that's the tune. But then what I really want you to pick up on, okay, is the final line of this superscription. It's a maskil, and here's what a maskil is. It's kind of like a popular song in ancient Israel. So this would have been a top 10 tune in ancient Israel. Because even way back then, sad songs sold. And then we get the author of this song. His name is Heman, the Ezrahite. Now, we know something about Heman from the rest of the Old Testament. Heman was actually a songwriter. He was a musician who lived during the time of one of the greatest kings in the history of the nation of Israel. He lived during the time of King David. King David himself was a very proficient, very prolific songwriter. He wrote a lot of psalms that we have in the book of Psalms. But one of the Psalms was written by this guy named Haman. Now, there is this one moment in the history of the nation of Israel where Haman was actually tapped by David to lead a worship service, to lead the praise and worship portion of the service for ancient Israel. And he was supposed to stand right in front of something called the Ark of the Covenant to lead this service. Anybody ever heard of the Ark of the Covenant before? The ancient Israelites believed this was like the throne of God. This was the place where God sat. In fact, just in case you haven't seen it before, I brought a picture of it here for you. This is a snapshot of the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant by a very famous archaeologist named Indiana Jones in the 1940s. You may have learned about him in your history class, but I hope you didn't. Because if you did, it wasn't a good history class. But actually, the picture from the movie is a pretty good depiction of what the thing probably looked like. And so Haman's standing right in front of this box. Right in front of the very throne of God. The very man who once felt like God had left him. Like Satan was chasing him. Like he was abandoned without hope and with only darkness. He's now standing right in front of the throne of God. He's as close to God as any human being can get. And so the worship service begins. In 1 Chronicles 16, verse 41, here's what we read about the worship service. We got Haman there. And we got Jeduthun there. And we got the rest of those chosen and designated by name to give thanks to the Lord. They're all there. They're all in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and they sing this song. And here's the song they sing in 1 Chronicles 16, verse 41. God's love endures forever. That's the song that Haman sings. It turns out that Psalm 88 was a song of Haman. But it wasn't the only song of Haman. There was another song. A song of praise. A song of love. And a song of hope. Listen. If you're struggling with depression, if Psalm 88 is your song, here's the most important thing I can tell you. It's a song, but it's not the only song out there. God has another song for you. You see, here's the reality. Depression can last for a long time. In fact, kind of like with Haman, sometimes it can last a lifetime. But as Haman reminds us in his other song, God's love endures for how long? Forever. Which means that God's love always outdoes, outlasts, and outlives our limits. And because of that, we can have hope. Depression may be a detour, but it doesn't have to be a dead end. Haman found hope in the Lord. And you can too. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, sometimes the trials and the troubles The sadness and the sorrows of this life can be overwhelming to us. And so in the middle and in the midst of all of that, may we look to the Lord's love, because his love endures forever. May that be our hope, and may he be our hope. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.